Hello and welcome to Families Made Differently. This month we are going to change it up a little bit. I have my mum joining me today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Rebecca's mum and my name's Erica Anderson. I raised 4 children who are now all
Beautiful
adults.
and amazing.
Yeah, well.
Questionable.
So yeah, raised four children in a number of different countries over the years. We started our family in Zimbabwe, moved to Botswana, and then moved to Ireland. Spent most of our children's lives in Ireland, but had done a good chunk of life in Africa before that.
My mum is going to be asking me a few questions. As we've produced the podcast, it's been going for 5 months now. We realised in episode 1, we kind of introduced myself and Jack and our story. Since then, we haven't really given you any updates. And in that episode, we said we were about to adopt our son. And then we just have never given you any more details. So we thought this month that I would ask my mum to come and interview me, just give you an update as to where we are in our life. Okay. Do you want to get on with the questions?
Yeah, I'd love to. A little bit of our background is that obviously I have a slightly different accent and I'm from Africa. And I was raised in Africa, so it gave quite a strong link to Africa. I think that's important in Rebecca's story too. I'm going to ask her some questions and that'll become clear as we go through. I've listened to all the podcasts, obviously, and some of them multiple times because I was sent them before they were actually podcasts. And so I had lots of questions that arose over the time, partly because of the change in story along the way. But in episode 1, Rebecca and Jack talked a little bit about feeling called to adopt or not feeling called to adopt. And as far as I know, Rebecca always felt called to adopt. Rebecca, at what age did you really feel that calling?
When I was 16, I went and spent our school's summer in South Africa with my grandparents. My mum's side of the family still lives in South Africa. I went for 3 months, but 3 months is quite a long time. I tried to fill my time constructively. What am I going to do other than just hang out in South Africa? One of the things I chose to do was to volunteer in a children's home called Rainbow House. They had about, I think, 14 children there at the time. I spent a month there in total. It was split over the 3 months. That is when I started to feel cold. I just fell in love with the children. They had been a combination of like abused, abandoned, neglected. That was kind of where it started, and God just really placed a love for those children on my heart. From there, I fell in love with one specific girl that I tried to convince my mum and dad to actually adopt. She was 12 or 13. She definitely was never going to be adopted. Mum, Dad, I think you should do this. And they were like, I don't think that's our calling and it's not the right time for us, essentially, is what you said. You said if it had happened earlier in your lives, it probably would have worked better timing wise. I was like, okay, fair enough. I could really feel that was the passion God was putting on my heart. Vulnerable children and finding homes for them, but also providing a home for them. And so that's kind of where it started. What I love is that was in 2011. It was 10 years later that Toyam moved in with us. So it was like such a beautiful, like, God placed this on my heart, and then 10 years later he fulfilled what he'd planted, like that idea or desire.
You mentioned your son there. The status has changed since the first podcast, where things were happening but they'd taken a long time and there was a process. Where have we gone since episode 1 and you've never mentioned anyone again?
The podcast was actually recorded in January 2023. Our adoption completed in February, and then we found out...
How old was Toyam then?
He was about to turn 2. He turned 2 like at his next birthday.
Okay.
We found out like a couple weeks later with his birth mum, there's another baby due, and we were like, yes, please. We kind of went through the process again. This time we had subsequently moved quite a distance from their local authority, which meant as much as we fostered to adopt our son because he was local to us. So we went through mainstream adoption this time. So she went into foster care when she was born once the court proceedings had concluded and a decision for permanency had been made for her that was adoption. We have then subsequently adopted her. So she moved in with us in March of 2024. Her adoption completed in July of 2024. So before the podcast was even released, we actually had a son and a daughter brought to us through adoption.
So you did EP with your first adoption and you did mainstream with your second. Give us a little summary of the positives and negatives of both.
Early permanence or foster to adopt, the child moves in with you, in theory, from the first time they move into the care system. So for our son, he moved in with us at 4 days old, and he has lived with us since 4 days old. We've been his main caregivers, so nothing's kind of changed in that regard. Whereas our daughter, she was born, and I guess the main hope was that she'd end up with us if she wasn't reunited. She spent 9 months in foster care, and then she moved in with us. So the difference is she's had two distinctive caregivers, and she was very attached to her first caregiver, and then she's now attached to us because she's been with us a significant length of time. I guess the main difference is that was quite an adjustment for, I would say, both of us, because we're so well established with our son and we're from like week 1 or 2. I think it was quite an adjustment getting a baby that wasn't a baby and had been raised by someone else for 9 months. So I think that was the biggest difference for us. In regards to process and risk, our son's like case and the roller coaster of that whole experience was way more uncertain. Whereas once our daughter was moved in with us, she wasn't going anywhere. There was never a risk. The risk kind of happened like before, but because we didn't know her, we didn't experience in the same way. We knew about her and we knew we wanted her, but we didn't have to go through, oh, this person's come onto the scene to potentially be a carer, or this has happened in her case, or that's happened in her case. And mainstream was way easier in a lot of ways, but harder in different ways because of attachment and just the age at which the child moved in.
Yeah, and you did mention that they are full siblings.
I didn't mention that. Our son and daughter are full birth siblings. That is also really exciting. So we got the opportunity to keep them together. If you listen back now to some of the previous podcasts, you'll spot that I'm very for keeping siblings together.
If you listen back to the November special, she speaks with Jennifer, and Jennifer was in a family where siblings were adopted into the family. And it was clearly really special to have kept the siblings together. And the outcomes were different, but it was a very special podcast. So do listen back.
Yeah, listen back to all the podcasts. Yeah, they're all special.
This is a question that's a little bit more personal, talking about family, extended family, grandparents, siblings, because obviously you have 4 siblings. Jack has 1 sibling. So between you have quite a lot of people in your extended family.
Yeah.
How helpful did you find the support of family members?
I think the family were just really supportive. Once they heard why we wanted to do it and what we wanted to do, everyone was really positive about it. And so that was great. And then also they just fell in love with our kids, which has also been really lovely. They've just wrapped themselves around our children as if they were their own flesh and blood
they
children.
Are my very own.
But so they have treated them like we treated them. They're our children, and they're their children too. And
they're our grandchildren.
Yeah, they're your grandchildren, and it never felt different or weird or.
And you have some special names in the grandparent line, don't you?
From my background in South Africa, my parents, they are Oma and Opa, and so Oma just means old mum in Afrikaans, and Opa means old pa. On Jack's side, his mum is Welsh, so we have a 9 in that line, and a papa. Special names to highlight everyone's heritage. Another thing that hasn't been revealed on the podcast is that we have transracially adopted, so our children are of a different heritage to us. That is something we try and promote and encourage within our home, which has also meant that we've needed to ourselves almost celebrate our heritages more. So my African heritage, Jack's Welsh and English heritage, and then their heritage as well. So we've just really celebrated that. So we celebrate various Independence Days and
bring in new Christmas traditions and things
and foods and all that bit. So it's been quite fun actually, just to add to our repertoire of variety that we already have within our home. And our children bring a different spice of that in.
Yeah. Are there any things that you found during the process really difficult with family? Just things that maybe just were tricky with family?
First one that's kind of funny is like, it took my granny ages to get her head around the fact we were adopting. She's just of that generation, and that's so fine, and that's...
She is almost 92.
No, I'm not giving her a hard time at all. It's just funny because, like, she I don't know how many times I got asked if I just couldn't have children. The amount of times she went, can you just not have kids? But then as she fell in love with our kids, I think it became less and less important to her why we went this route. And it was just like, oh, these are my great-grandchildren and this is great. So that bit was kind of funny, but also not helpful. Not that I mind if someone's like, wait, you can't have kids, or I don't mind tackling that like question because I don't know, and because there is no like hurt wrapped up in that. But I could imagine if I had come from a place of infertility,
that would be really
people
hard.
like prying and like asking questions, like that's not helpful. That is not helpful. Like the adoption process is hard enough. I couldn't imagine doing it with infertility being part of my story, because it just makes it really hard, and really there's so much hurt wrapped up in it. So another thing that wasn't helpful in our second adoption was some of our family members struggled with attachment to our daughter. And I think it was that because she was that much older.
Yeah, can I offer some kind of insight? So I'm thinking of one particular relationship that was a really difficult relationship, and I feel that has got so good now that I can talk about it freely, as it was more about the fact that it was a gender that she was having an issue with. In her early foster caring, it was way more female
orientated. Yeah.
And so then when she came to our family, we are literally 50-50, and in all areas we're 50-50.
Caregiving is not
all 50-50.
a female job. Yeah.
And so it didn't matter whether it was your brother or your sister or your mum or your dad, everyone was keen to care. However, there was a real difficulty for her with the male members of the family more so than the female. And in particular, one person within the family who really struggled, because felt like it was almost personal when it wasn't.
I mean, even from the adult side struggle.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
There's been a few where the adults have struggled with attachment.
Okay.
And gone, I don't know what to do with her. She's not a newborn.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, we've had that a bit. So that's also
I didn't have an issue with that. She just wanted to kiss me all the time.
I think that was a hard fact. And that's just also time. And we don't live near any family.
Yeah.
So it's not like people can just pop in and be, oh, we're here, let's hang out. It's, oh, we're coming for a visit. And a visit's intense and long and all those things. So I think people just struggled from the distance and the age she was. Whereas with Hoyan, like, even if they hadn't seen us in a month or two, he was only 8 weeks, I don't know, maybe 12 weeks old. He was still like a baby. That was a struggle. I think everyone's attached to both of them really well now.
And what about managing with expectations and emotions of the family? Because that must be a huge part of the adoption process for your extended family as well.
Yeah.
But then you're having to manage that.
For that part, you kind of hold information back a lot of the time. Like, that's a big part of it. So we knew about our son's existence like while we were still being assessed. So I think we heard about him in the December or January. He was born in March kind of thing. So we'd been praying about him and for him for months, but we didn't really know what was happening. We didn't know. We literally had no clue. So we were meeting his social worker on the afternoon after panel.
Just remind me what panel is exactly.
Panel is, go to panel to be approved as adopters, and then you go to panel to be matched with children.
Okay.
So it's just a board of people.
So this was the approval stage.
This was approval, yeah. Okay. So it's just a board of people who make a decision that your social worker has assessed you to a good enough standard that you are good enough to adopt or foster. Foster carers do it too. So we went into approval panel on the Monday morning, and then we had a meeting with the social worker in the evening. So that was all happening. We were like, okay, she's gonna come, check us out, decide if we are a good fit for him, kind of thing. That's what we're expecting. Then she arrived and went, okay, so he was born yesterday and he's probably moving in with you on Wednesday. And like, we just thought she was coming to check us out. Like, he was a few weeks early because I think he was due like 2 or 3 weeks after that, and that was his like due date. So we were like not expecting him to have been born before we went to panel, but we definitely weren't expecting him to like be that quick. And we definitely weren't expecting her to just be like, he's moving in. We hadn't told you guys of his existence because we were just going to approval panel. It was just very, in theory, early on in the process. So yeah, so we just didn't tell you mostly because we didn't know.
Probably more because there was uncertainty in it.
Well,
and so
yeah.
you were protecting emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
And so in that way, managing expectations.
I think for that one, it was just an element of unknown. I think for a lot of the other stuff, like, because we might be told one day, oh, it looks like it's very likely to go to adoption. A week and a half later, we're told, oh, this has come up, and actually they're a really promising family member who might be a good candidate for having this within a kinship care arrangement kind of thing. So
kinship care is with a family member of
the birth, extended birth family, yes. It would fluctuate, like literally almost like week on week, it felt. Our social worker visits weren't that regular, so it probably wasn't quite that. It would just fluctuate a lot. You do end up just not giving all the information all the time. You'll hint to it. Like, I think we found it really difficult. So we were finding it difficult, but then our family were finding it difficult. Like, I remember Jack's sister, our son, for the first time, he was like 6 weeks old. She like cried over the fact he might not stay with us. The first time she was meeting him, just the potential of him going back to birth family and how that was very much still like on the table. All those emotions you just try and manage as the adopters, because essentially we're putting our family through it as well.
And to be honest, from my point of view, it was really hard, especially the whole no preparation stage. So from you going to panel on Monday, informing us on Monday night that you were having a boy and he was coming to live with you on Wednesday. There was no 9 months of pregnancy in that. There was nothing. Like, we had a few months because we knew he was a boy before, but yeah. But there was no preparation.
Yeah, we thought we could give you like 2 or 3 weeks after we knew what was happening after the social worker visit. We thought we'd have time to tell you stuff.
But even that, you don't have that time to be looking forward. That is a part of the expectations that you were managing, is our expectations of how it would work out if they were birth children. It would be very different, and it would feel very different.
Yeah, and even in that, we were trying to decide then, because he had to go to court before he moved in with us as well. So he went to the court on Tuesday evening and moved in with us Wednesday. And it was like, okay, do we tell them now on Sunday evening that we know like he might move in with us, but he also might not then? So it's like, and we might have to like wait for another baby kind of thing. So it's like, do we take you on that little roller coaster in theory of like, oh, we're about to have a baby, oh, we're not going to have a baby? Or do we? And that was a part of it. We were like, do we tell them at this point? Because we still don't really know. It was really hard just trying to navigate like what we share, what we don't share. We don't share life story, but that's different. That's like background. Whereas sharing the process was also challenging on what to choose, what to share and what to not share.
And you didn't share it with all family members always.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have shared some things with me that you didn't share with your siblings.
Yeah. With our daughter, like, so we were told that she was like in her mum's womb, but we didn't tell you. I don't even know that we told you before she was born. I think we only shared that information after she was born and after we were going to be assessed, and we had an assessment date for viability.
I think you told us that there was a sibling, but I think that was about it, and it was a bit vague. And
okay, fair.
You had moved away, so there was probably no possibility.
Yeah, maybe we were feeling at the very early stages that we were not their first pick. I wonder if we kind of like definitely like played on that to dampen any expectations.
But that is really helpful, and I'm sure that there are loads of people who will listen to the podcast and go, sure, managing the family's expectations are hard. But actually the family are part of what you're doing. They're not separate. It's a family thing. It's not just the two of you doing it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on family dynamics. But our family is definitely very like close and like aunts and uncles are in. Grandparents are like in. Like you guys try and visit like once a month to see the kid. You're like very much in our lives, even though we don't live
locally.
Locally, yeah.
The last question I have came out of something that Harriet said. She was the social worker that you interviewed in your 4th podcast. She spoke about her kind of own personal mission statement as a social worker being there for the last, the least, and the lost. And I found it really interesting because you were actually involved in a charity called International China Concern when you were a teenager. And their mission statement is being there for the last, the least, and the lost. And if we think about Jesus, he was also there for the last, the least, and the lost. And I was kind of thinking through that and kind of going, well, as adopters, that is a big part of what your mission statement is as well. But I just wondered how, or if those processes of being involved in an organization that actually looked after vulnerable children, even though you didn't physically go and do it, you were involved in fundraising for them or having a real heart for them. Was that all part of your process to adoption? Was it part of your story that led you there?
Don't know, because some of these seeds are just sown and you don't know
how God's going to water it.
Like use it or do it. So true answer is I don't know. Our church was a church partner with International China Concern. We ran fundraisers for them. I was very heavily involved. Every year, a lovely lady called Judy used to come to our church. She would share about everything that was happening in China, what the organization were doing, and how like babies were found just abandoned in bins and all sorts.
They were mostly children with disability, or they were...
Yeah, so this was during like when China had the policy of only one child per family. Either if they were female or if they had a disability, they were often abandoned because
they could only have one.
So they wanted the cream of the crop. So that's the background of the charity. But like, I feel like I struggled hearing some of the stories because I couldn't help, like to a degree. Like, yes, you can fundraise and send money and that side of things, but you almost want to be able to do something.
Well, now you're doing something.
Well, we're trying. It still doesn't feel like we're doing enough, but yeah, it just feels like my heart was probably just broken more for vulnerable children. And yeah, it was probably just another thing God used to just push me in the right direction and encourage me, and this is what I'm calling you to.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else that you had thought that you wanted to share with us?
Like, so looking ahead, let's go looking ahead a little bit. Yeah. We are busy considering whether we host an unaccompanied minor, because as I said, it never feels like you're doing enough. Yes, we have 2 beautiful children, but they're ours. And now, like, how can we make an impact? We have them and we're taking care of them and we're nurturing them and we're bringing them up and raising them. But it doesn't feel like we necessarily have feet on the ground. Our story isn't done with vulnerable children yet.
If for some reason you were informed that there was another child in the sibling group, how would that make you feel? And what would your reactions be?
Honestly, it would all be about timing. For the last 9-10 months since our daughter moved in, we have been very much on the front line of trying to build attachment and really working to get our relationship to where it should be with our daughter for the age she is, trying to deepen it and catch up on lost time. That's kind of what we've been very much in right now. We don't have much more capacity right now.
Because it would be quite hard to then say no. There is an element that would be difficult.
Yeah, there is an element that would be difficult. It's one of those, I think we would be a bit more, I want to say strong-handed, but that's potentially not the right word. With our daughter, we kind of let them, and our son, we kind of let them lead the process, like social work. In our opinion, if they were being genuinely child-focused, they would have moved her into our home at about 6 months from fostering, but they chose not to do that, which is their decision as a social work team. But I think if we were to do it again, now that we have 2 siblings already placed and knowing how long attachment took for our daughter, I think we'd be fighting for earlier, almost as soon as the essential elements of a foster placement in the local area. So whether that's contact with birth parents or all those elements that require fostering to happen local to that local authority, once they're done, like fighting for actually, no, this child now needs to be in our care if you want us to take them, because you're just delaying something for no one's gain. Like, the child doesn't gain, we don't gain, no one gains. Like, the siblings don't gain. I think we'd be a bit more like
straight.
Yeah, and like it would be like on our terms rather than theirs, because we're like, actually we want this child, so we'll kind of bend to your will. But actually no, now it's like you actually should want us to have the child for their benefit and for our kids' benefit. So actually let's not just do it your way, let's do it a new way. Let's find a way together that works for both of us, kind of thing.
Well, on that note, I think that's probably all for this one.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and turn your notifications on wherever you get your podcasts. This was Families Made Differently, the podcast designed to share stories from Christians across the UK whose lives and families have been shaped by fostering and adoption. This was your host, Bex Baker.